Good job. You remembered.
I remembered. All right, I guess we can start. So good evening, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wong, and I am an author and assistant professor of creative writing in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I am a Chinese woman with blonde and purple hair, and I currently have a Zoom background featuring my new book, Tell Me Pleasant Things About Immortality, which has neon pink and blue mushrooms on a black background. I want to welcome you all to our final event for a publishing speaker series. And today we are very lucky because we are featuring a reading and Q&A with a very acclaimed YA author, Tanya Boteju. And today's event will be recorded. So if you do not want to be on the camera, please keep your video off. We also ask that you keep your mics muted. We've already have a lot of questions submitted. So we'll only turn to questions in the chat if there is time. And before we start, I'd like to give the land acknowledgement. Department of English at the University of Winnipeg acknowledges that we live and work in the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Oji Cree nations. The University of Winnipeg sits in Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe peoples. As a settler of color writer, I am not only committed to honoring and following the lead of the land, water, and cultural protectors of this space, but I am also a constant and forever student of the remarkable stories and tellings by Indigenous peoples here and around the world. Today's event is generously sponsored by the Writers' Union of Canada, and I want to thank them for their support, and I'm also very grateful to all of you for joining us today. If you feel moved to, please share where you are coming from in the chat on Zoom. I see some of my colleagues in the English department. Hello, and I also see some students as well. So thank you all for coming. Now I'd like to introduce Tanya Boteju. She, her is an English teacher and writer living on unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in Vancouver, Canada. Her novel, Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens, it's a very brilliant YA novel, so you should all pick it up if you have a chance, was published by Simon & Schuster in 2019. It was named an Indie Top 10 Pick of the Summer by the American Booksellers Association and a Rainbow List selection of 2020. Her short story, Floating, appears in the anthology Out Now, Inkyard Press 2020, and her newest YA novel, Bruised, came out in 2021 by Simon & Schuster, and it was selected as a gold standard book by the Junior Library Guild. Tanya is grateful for her patient wife, supportive family and friends, committed educators, sassy students, and hot mugs of tea. In both teaching and writing, she is committed to positive, diverse representation. So please welcome Tanya.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And I'll echo, thank you so much for coming, those of you who are here and putting up with these Zoom events. They're so tricky to keep coming to. So I appreciate you joining us today. And I also just want to acknowledge I'm here on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, also known as Vancouver, BC. And I am a South Asian brown-skinned woman with very short, dark hair, silver earrings, and I'm wearing a green shirt with a blue background that has a pattern of elephants on it. So I am here today to chat with you all, I hope, and Lindsay about writing and books. And I'm going to start with a very, very short reading from my very first book, Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens. It was my debut young adult novel. And just really shortly, it's about a young girl named Nima who discovers the wonderful world of drag and comes to more of herself through that wonderful world. And so I'm just going to read the section where Nima stumbles into this tent at a local festival and comes upon a drag show. And one of the performers is a drag king whose non-stage name is Winnow, and Nima is quite taken by this experience. Amid the blur of images emerging before me, Winnow's performance definitely brought my vision into sharper focus. She performed George Michael's Freedom 90 and held the audience spellbound with a slickly choreographed lip sync to the song and an energy that somehow toyed moment to moment with our sense of her. The sideburns screamed masculine, but her soft, shifting limbs and elegant eyelashes spoke all girl. She emanated stillness and exertion, modesty and brashness, and then none of those things, but something in between. Toward the end of the number, I watched in a haze as she slowly shed the upper half of her clothing until she wore only shoes, pants, and a thin band of hot pink flagging tape wound several times around her chest. Every part of my body burned with heat and anticipation as she undressed and prowled the stage on her hands and knees, lyrics unspooling from her mouth like silk ribbons. My throat clamped shut as she crawled toward me. Leaning over the edge of the stage, her face hovered so close to my own as she lip-synced a few lines and fixed her eyes on mine. I just hope you understand, sometimes the clothes do not make the man. This time, there was no mistake. The jello in my legs steadily overcame the rest of my body, and I thought I was going to wobble out of my chair. I wanted to hold her gaze, I really did, but I feared she'd see right through me to the quivering mess inside and realize she was wasting her lyrics. So I dropped my eyes to her hands and watched them slip away from the edge of the stage. When I looked up again, she'd focused her attention on an older woman whose mouth opened into an enormous smile. Winnow stepped down off the stage and sat just at the edge of the woman's knees. She sang the next few lyrics from there, placing the woman's hands over her own shifting hips. After a few moments, Winnow stood, swiveled smoothly toward her chosen audience member, and placed a kiss on the back of the woman's hand. That could have been my hand. My next breath remained trapped in my chest, and my rib cage cracked from the pressure. Deidre reached over and squeezed my knee, but I scarcely felt it. I could barely do anything except try and get that breath out. When I finally did, a sassy geisha tattoo peeked through the gap in the pink tape as Winnow disappeared through the back of the tent. The familiar sense of a missed opportunity swept over me. One performance followed hers. I don't remember any of it. So this is Nima's first introduction to drag and sort of starts the ball rolling as she encounters a whole bunch of other drag performers and kind of discovers things about herself that she didn't really know she had in her through her interactions with these folks.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. What I really love about all your writing, especially in this book, is that you have this ability to really create really vivid, memorable teen characters. And one of the questions I have is, how do you go about crafting these three-dimensional young people on the page? And how do you just get that? How do you get their depiction and how do you get their voice right? I think that's something I'm always wondering, and I think students as well.
Yeah, totally. I think it as adults writing young adult fiction, something we are always thinking about. And I'm kind of blessed in that I have two careers that I really love, and the other one is teaching, and I teach high school, and so I'm surrounded by young adults all of the time. So that helps a lot. I am always trying to pay attention to how my writing of young adults is matching up to the young adults that are surround me. And, some of my beta readers are also young adults, teens that I have, or at least used to be teens and were recently teens who I've taught. And so that keeps me in check too, just having those first readers who are at that age. But for me, it's really about it comes down to respect and just having respect for that age group. And I have so much respect for them because they're constantly teaching me all the time. And so, knowing that while there is something to be said for capturing a certain voice at that age, at the same time, a lot of the conversations I have with students feels like I'm talking to adults. And so, not to underestimate the kinds of things that they can say and how they can sound as well, because sometimes it's, just as mature as any adult that I know.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point about thinking about your character, but also thinking of them as real people. So this actually goes on to another question I had, because a lot of our students are in the education stream. They're thinking about becoming English teachers, but also writers. So could you maybe describe your typical writing day for us, especially, when you're balancing teaching and I guess you work full time or
Not anymore.
not anymore, but you do
Yeah.
teach a lot. And I think students want to know, is it glamorous? Is writing and teaching very glamorous?
So glamorous. Um, yeah, it's really not at all. But I love both still. I wrote Kings while I was still teaching full time, which was tricky but doable. I had been teaching at that point for about 13 or 14 years. And so, I mean, I wasn't a brand new teacher, which I think would have been tricky to do both, although anything's possible. And so I really tried while I was doing that book to keep myself on track while I was teaching. I totally failed the first year. Like I started the book during the summer, completely failed to write that entire school year following, and then wrote more in the summer again. And then what I did was I actually signed myself up for Simon Fraser's writer studio to keep myself on track, which really helped. Like having some sort of accountability. You don't need to sign up for a course for that, but having a writing partner or something, just because teaching is so absorbing, as you know, and exhausting, and it can take up so much of your time. It's so easy to just like do more, do more, do more, and so I really had to carve out some time and protect it. And even now that I'm teaching part-time, and theoretically have more time for writing, it still, seeps into my writing days. And so I have to still really protect certain time. And so what I'll do at the beginning of the work week is kind of like block out just time and treat it like appointments. This is the really glamorous part, everybody. Backstage pass into all the glamour. Um, it's literally like a calendar that I drew out, that I will say, like, these are 2 hours that I am writing and that's it. And there's nothing is allowed to get in the way of that, even if something maybe isn't quite as good as I wanted it to be for my classroom. That's what I have to do, right? I can't do everything. So I've had to really like set aside some of the things I used to do in teaching. I still think I'm a good teacher, but I might just not go quite as overboard in planning as I used to, that kind of thing. So it's tricky. I think teaching is a tricky one because again, you can just always give more. But it also works really well with writing. So if you're becoming English teachers, I found that both careers just feed back and forth into one another so well. Like I taught writing much more than I was writing myself before I actually started writing professionally. And I got so much out of that, which seems kind of backwards, that I was teaching writing before I was doing a lot of it on my own. But I taught myself so much by that and then learned from my students as well and what worked and what didn't work, that when I started writing myself, it actually felt really natural. And I felt like I'd learned something from myself and from them. And now I continue to do that for sure.
That's great. It sounds like you have to be really good at setting boundaries, having a good planner or at least a calendar, blocking out time. Yeah, it's all
Yeah,
very
that's what works
glam-
for me anyways. I don't know. I
yeah.
mean, what do you block out time, like, or do you just sort of haphazardly find it where you can
Whenever I
to write?
can, whenever there's like a moment or break, I'll try to sit down and write. But I think it works for everyone. I like that idea though, of being organized and disciplined.
I think it's easier for some people to be organized and disciplined. Like I mean, people with kids, for example, I'm always in awe that you could find any time to write. But I think you have to, I think, from what I've heard of some writers, that it's not as organized and that just has to be like, I have 10 minutes right now and I'm going to sit down and write, which is obviously maybe not ideal, but it's what they have to do. And it works, they produce. But I think it's really different for everybody in their circumstances.
It seems like it's like about finding what works for you as a writer and your creative practice, but of course, prioritizing, right, the writing in many ways. Mhm.
Yeah,
So my
exactly.
question is about writing YA. Are there any rules that you specifically follow? And did you purposely break any when you were writing your books?
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting question. I haven't really thought about rules that I follow or break. I think the one rule that I do come back to, which is what I've already mentioned, which is just always respect the reader, especially young adults. Respect them, respect them, respect them, and and as that kind of goes into when I'm writing characters too, is am I like assuming something from my adult standpoint about them, about what might be important or less important to them? Am I like making judgments about how they might be feeling or reacting or acting in this situation, for example? And so really trying to always remind myself to respect who they are and what they have to offer and what they're feeling at that age. Trying to connect to that a little bit. In terms of breaking rules, I mean, I think now that I've been writing for a little bit, I am starting to think more about, you know, what I've read in the past of what would have been considered maybe YA, and what I think of in terms of like a plot line and what we learn in, high school English about plot, and moving away from that a little bit and just like allowing the story and the plot to arise more organically. So I, for instance, like won't necessarily always need to think about, like this is going to be the climactic point. There could be several climactic points, or it could be really circular. Like I'm not writing like that yet, but I'm trying to get out of the habit of thinking in that like, Freytag's pyramid kind of idea that we've all been hammered over the head with. I mean, it grounds me. I do find that particular structure kind of grounds me a little bit, but then once I have a sense of plot and I've sort of mapped out a little bit of that, I'm trying to allow myself to go away with it and go away from it and experiment a little bit more. So a lot of that comes from reading other books as well, and just seeing how people are experimenting with narrative structure and voice. I think that I have a lot to learn from the writers around me, and so I'm just constantly trying to read books that might not read. I might not have read like 5 years ago, for example. I don't know. Do you break rules?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about because in this YA class, we've been focusing on Save the Cat for novel, which I find really, really useful for structuring a whole book. And it's formulaic and for to some extent I do follow it, but at the same time, I'm always breaking away from it because I find that it doesn't quite work sometimes when I'm writing an adult novel. But I think it's really good to have like the basics.
Yeah, I think so too. Again, like it really does ground me, and it helps me, like especially when I'm sort of deep into the book and then I get stuck and I'm not quite sure what needs to happen next. I'll just like sit back and try and get the big picture and see like what am I maybe missing in terms of a basic plot structure, and that sometimes helps me like push forward a little bit. But I don't always stick to that, but it does help me get through those sticky bits sometimes.
It's interesting because you hear writers, some people just follow it exactly. And they're like, by page 241, this happens, that happens. And it
Yeah.
seems to work for them. So,
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of stories do kind of fall into that in some way. I mean, I don't really follow the whole percentages thing,
mhm.
but in terms of like the big pieces of plot, I do try to aim for those a little bit, and it helps me move forward for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe it tends to only work for commercial fiction. I'm curious about trying it with a literary novel.
Yeah, probably less so. Yeah,
Right, because
certainly
it's
what I
not
find.
as
Yeah.
plot driven. Yeah. But then why it's so interesting because it's always just right on that fringe of, literary and commercial. It's a commercial plot, but at the same time, it's quite well written.
Yeah, there's some beautiful, YA out there that I'm just trying to think. I'm probably not gonna be able to think of one on the spot, but I'm trying to think of, YA novels where the structure is more playful and more experimental.
Mhm.
I mean, there's obviously the books that are written in verse, for example.
Yeah.
Uh yeah, I don't know. I just read My Summer of Bittersweet by Jen. I wrote it
Jen
down.
Ferguson.
Jen Ferguson. Yeah, have you read it?
No, not yet. I have
Really good.
excerpts from
Yeah,
for
it's
class, but we haven't gone through them. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, she's got. I think she does some interesting things with like I think there's still that, up and down structure. We see like the character go through, the shit she needs to go through, and then come out the other side. And there's somewhat of a climactic moment, but I feel like it's much more complicated than that. And
Mhm.
she goes back and forth a little bit more than you might see in a sort of a more standard novel structure. Um, yeah, and then you've got the books that have, I don't know, um, that have maybe more of a like a less predictable ending perhaps, and one that you don't expect in YA. I think for YA you often expect a happy ending.
Mhm.
And that's certainly where I tend towards, but it's less likely. I think teenagers love not happy endings too, or more realistic endings as well. And so that's something that may be a bit different at times.
Mhm. No, that's interesting to note. My tendency is to always want to kill off a character. I'm always like, let's just kill them off. I don't want to deal with it anymore.
Of course it is, Lindsay.
Yes. There's a question from a student, and they want to know, like, after 2 books, is there anything that surprises you about writing? And does writing get easier?
Um, it does not. I don't know. I haven't found gets easier. I think writing is hard. I think good writing is hard. And I think that it takes lots of time, and it's, never going to be really efficient. You can't really cut corners, or I haven't learned, like that there's some tricky way of writing faster and better. In fact, like I would say, like I've got a few projects on the go right now, and a couple of them have just taken way more time and effort and thought than either of my first 2 books, and taken longer to write. And that's not necessarily, I don't think, a reflection of um, me as a writer, becoming worse. I think that's me just dealing with maybe more intricate stories and characters, and really trying to figure out these characters in a maybe in a different way than I approached at least my first book. Perhaps characters always been really important to me, but I think I'm learning now more about digging a little deeper into those characters and complicating them a bit more. um, I would say I have what surprises me about writing now, I think everything is so different. Every project is completely different. I don't know that you find this too, but even if I'm writing a YA contemporary novel, which is what I tend to do, um, my approach might be completely different from how I approach Kings, from how I approach Brews. The process is so different. I have to try new things. I'm constantly learning new things. But that was something, like, I thought I had sort of a good groove going with both of these novels, and now I don't. I have completely different tools that I use depending on the circumstance, and I outline a little bit more than I used to.
Mhm.
Change from earlier on. I have a couple of projects where I've actually written a full synopsis that acts as a bit of an outline, which I kind of had to do eventually with both books, but I hadn't with Kings. I didn't have any idea where the story was going when I started writing, and to some extent, same with Bruised.
It's interesting. I think it's important to think about how, like, each novel, it's almost like a different beast, right? That we have to somehow overcome, right? Because we've already been into a certain terrain, and now it has to be a little bit different, or at least a lot different, I think, the story we're telling.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know whether any technique or strategy or approach can fit um, any story, right?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Um, this might be a good starting point, because you mentioned that you're working on a third YA novel, and it's I don't know if you want to share it today, or little
Yeah,
snippet.
so well, I've got a few projects on the go. This is one that I've been working on for a long, long time. I haven't, I'm not with a publisher or anything yet with it. Still trying to get it out there. But I love it. I'm happy with it, even if it doesn't get out to the world. And it kind of ties in with Kings to some extent, not in that the stories are connected, but the inspiration for it was drag. With Kings, the inspiration was my experience as a drag king in my 20s here in Vancouver. And it was kind of a story that I really thought I had in me. And then with this book that I'm working on, I really thought with Kings that there's just so much more to drag that I wanted the world to kind of know about, beyond, what we tend to see the most of in media and such. And so, yeah, this book has definitely taken me on a journey. It started out as like one character's story, and then it became two characters' story, and then it flipped to the other character's story. So I've actually done like a full rewrite of it from a two-person or two-character perspective story to a single character perspective story, that was a real process that I'd never done before, which was really tricky. But I really I have a lot of feelings about this book, and so I just wanted to share the opening of it. It's about a 20-year-old girl named Kala, and she's also a drag performer. And this book kind of delves more into some of the different scenes you see in drag. So sort of like that here in Vancouver would be like a West Side scene versus maybe an East Side scene. More typical drag, what you'd see maybe on RuPaul's Drag Race, versus maybe some of the more experimental, edgier drag that you might see down the road for me, kind of thing. And so this is about Kala, who is trying to get her brother back, who has disappeared for reasons we don't know just yet. And she does that by starting her own drag house. And so I'll just read the opening. So this is a little bit longer. It's about 10 minutes. I'll read from that. Okay, so this is, there's a prologue, and then I'll read chapter 1. Watch this next performer. Raji was beaming next to Kala. She smiled, seeing his eyes so bright, his grin so big. It was almost as fun watching him as it was watching the drag performers do their thing, but she followed his eyes now to the full-bodied beauty on stage as she stretched, dipped, bent, spun across the surface. Her jaw dropped when the queen went into a full split and bounced up and down a few times like it wasn't excruciating. Raji put his fingers in his mouth and let loose a long, piercing whistle, sending a thrill straight into Kala's chest. The heat of the bodies next to her, of the lights, of the movements emerging from the stage, all of it created a kind of heat in her too. She was thirsty for more. Raji had insisted she accompany him to this show, and it took no persuasion whatsoever to get her here, even though she'd had to borrow her cousin's ID to get in. Raji had never officially come out to her, but they both knew that she knew, and she knew that he knew that she loved the shit out of him anyway. What he didn't know was that Kala was queer too, but she just hadn't gotten there yet. She'd been 17 going on 18, and he was 19, and she thought she'd give him a little space before jumping into the mix. But coming here with him to a drag show felt like a secret sibling coming out party, and she was so down for it. She loved seeing him like this, so openly in ecstasy over the array of queerness around them. Amazing, right? He yelled vaguely toward Kala without removing his eyes from the performer. Totally, Kala yelled back at him. They were near the front of the crowd, about 3 rows back from the stage, so every inch of the performer's body was easily accessible to their wide eyes. The flash and sparkle of her bejeweled heels, her thick quads and hard-as-hell calves, the perfect projection of her nipples. Nothing went unnoticed by either of them, Kala was sure. And she could see why Raji was so mesmerized. She'd only seen drag queens on TV. They were gorgeous and mesmerizing too, but seeing drag live like this, up close, the energy from the performers and the crowd moved her, over, through, and around her. She could tell drag did that for Raji too. His face was pure joy, pure elation. She reached around his waist and squeezed him into her side. Hey, He shouted into Kala's ear. Don't cramp my style, sis. All the cuties in here are going to think you're my girlfriend or something. When he pulled back, his grin was full and cheeky. She rolled her eyes. You asshole, we look like fucking twins. At this, he laughed and wrapped his own arm around her shoulder, filling Kala with a buoyancy she felt would last forever. She'd never seen him happier or more himself, and she wanted him to stay this way, always. So this is chapter 1. Kala checks the back door to the store to make sure it's locked. She tries to take these rare, quiet moments at the shop to let oneself slip into another. She rolls a rack of saris to the side, moves the cracked, floor-length mirror from its hiding spot to rest it against the fridge, lugs 2 cardboard boxes from the floor onto the love seat to clear some space. From a roll of gold lace ribbon lying on one of the sewing tables, she pulls a short strip and cuts it with scissors. A bright ruby red sari waits for her on a mannequin that stands in the back of her parents' sari shop. The fridge with a mirror against it, the small opening on the floor, the gold lace, the glaring white mannequin clothed in red. It's the best she can do to carve out a space for herself, or rather, her other self, herself amongst the clutter. Kala hits play on her phone and then tucks the phone into her back pocket. She unravels the ruby sari from its mannequin and drapes it around her, not too tight, easy to slip off quickly if needed. She places the small piece of lace on top of her head and closes her eyes for a moment, mouthing the words to the song's chorus and moving her head to the beat. The lyrics and bass bring her into a different place, and her body responds. Shoulders back, eyebrow peaked, a sway, a slight bounce, a step forward, then back. The boxes and faceless mannequins, furniture and racks begin to fall away. She opens her eyes and sees her own face in the mirror, but also not her face. This is the face of someone who has lost something and is trying to find it again. It's a face both fierce and loyal, fearful and yearning, the face of someone determined to fix the things she's broken. Kala tips the gold lace over her brow like a fancy bowler hat and stares down her nose into the full-length mirror in her reflection. She grips a yardstick in her left hand like a cane. Fuck the queen, she mouths into the mirror. For their next drag show, Kala and her drag persona star, Anise, are going to bring some brown to the crown, as she likes to think of it. She's not usually a hyper queen, but she and her House of Spice drag family have decided to play with ideas of queenliness and royalty for this show. Kala has been toying with varying styles of saris and trying on different royal accessories for the past few weeks. She wants to simultaneously smash the monarchy while using royalty to bring her brownness to the forefront. Maybe she can't use the master's tools to take down the master's house, but she's going to at least cause some damage to the whole damn roof. So if she performs a swift turn for the girl in the mirror, and another, and then another, she catches her own eyes each time, channeling her frustrations into the ferocity Star Anise has become known for. Star is steel and determination. She is focused and flawless. Her curves are sharp edges slicing the air. Kala, what in the world are you doing? Kala's spin unwinds. Her edges turn slack. She scrambles for the phone in her pocket and stops the music. Her mother appears in the mirror, standing next to a mannequin who is itself standing stiff and watchful next to her. She has her hands on her hips and a baffled look on her face. She must have come through the front door. Kala didn't think her mom would be arriving to the shop until noon. It's only 11 o'clock, according to the clock on the wall. She turns, swallows, and tries to play it off. Oh, I was just bored and messing around. She knows as soon as she says it that this is the wrong thing to say. One of many wrong things to say. Her mother smacks her lips. Bored? With so much to do around the store? What nonsense. Take those things off. Your father is still sick and won't be in today. Right. She's in early because there's no end to our to-do list, Kala thinks. Her dad has been sick this entire week, making her and her mother's days at the store even longer because the store is faltering, just like her family. Her parents have owned fancy saris for 16 years, since Kala was just 4 years old. She grew up in its sprawling floor plan. The main portion, a long storefront with colorful panels of fabric lining the walls and wide tables to spread and cut material. Down one length of the store is a glass counter. Inside, jewelry glistens. But this isn't where Kala is right now, under her mother's own fierce glare. She's in the wide open space in the back that is divided into smaller sections by mountainous piles of material, years worth of forgotten clothing designs held in thin paper envelopes, tables carrying sewing machines, crowded gatherings of mannequins waiting in eternity for a replacement arm or head. Here, in the accumulated clutter of a business trying to stay afloat, as well as the push and pull of a family struggling under its own clutter, Kala has scraped out a pocket of space to step into Star and rehearse her performances when her parents aren't around. A surprising nook in one corner with a small kitchen, a couch, a table and chairs, and a tiny floor space that can be easily cleared thanks to Kala. Rehearsing here is safer than rehearsing at home, where she and her parents live on top of one another, where their cramped house offers very little space for her to be this other self. And yet, here too, she must sometimes make the quick shift from one self to another. Kala wipes the lace off of her head and scrunches it in her hands without realizing she's doing it. Sorry, I know, I'll do it. The ferocity in her eyes from before becomes apology. Did you move things around? Her mother asks, her eyes searching the kitchen. Oh, I was just trying to tidy up. Tidy? With everything else to be done? Her voice is at once reprimanding and exhausted. I know. Your father's still sick and you're wasting time moving things around? Yes, sorry. Have you restocked the bangles? No, not yet. Kala stares at the crumpled lace in her hands. Reprice the sale items? No, I will. There is so much to do at the store and for her family too. Organizing a confusing inventory of identities, navigating around the supply and demand of unspoken disappointments and longings. Maybe creating a whole other family in the House of Spice seems counterintuitive. Why bring together another set of identities and longings to manage? But Kala's own disappointments, her guilt and sadness produced a longing in her so great after her brother Raji left last year that the House of Spice had been the only answer. The House of Spice gave her a place to atone for her mistakes. She would create a space for others whose families wouldn't accept them. She would make it a space for Raji too, for when she found him and could bring him home. If she could bring Raji home, her parents would come back from their sorrow and denial. They'd see it was better with him here. Maybe they'd even accept him, and her too, eventually. She needed her House of Spice family to help her to rebuild this family. Kala! She raises her head at the sudden sharpness of her mother's voice. It is so hard to tell these days when her mother or father's exhaustion will turn to impatience, or when their impatience will turn to sorrow, their sorrow to anger. She measures all of her responses with deference, just in case. Yes? What is wrong with you? Her mother asks this like she doesn't know what's wrong with Kala, what's wrong with all of them, like there isn't a gaping hole in their house, in the store, in their family. Kala wants to shout, what is wrong with you? But would never. She knows it would only hurt her mother, and Kala has caused enough damage already. So she says nothing. These frustrations are hers to work out on the stage for now. Get to work and put these things back where you found them. Her mother turns and heads back to the front of the shop, muttering, honestly, I can't believe you'd mess around like this with everything we have to deal with. Kala watches her shuffle away. Her words are sharp, but her shape and movements are defeated. Kala throws the now crushed lace in a trash bin and unravels herself from the colorful sari. She puts the boxes back, hides the mirror, and gets to work. And that is the beginning of what is called right now Drag Things, but we'll see where it goes.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And I love that the arc and the emotion behind it. Just really, really powerful. And I guess that's a good segue to this question that I have about how so many writers and readers, I think that there's this general assumption that YA is really easy to write. It is not, as we both know. Do you think there's still a stigma from other writers and readers that YA isn't a real genre or maybe a lesser one compared to adult fiction?
Yeah, it's so funny because I live in a world of YA writers and we all know that it's hard to write and that it's amazing. It's an amazing genre and has so much to offer. And then I'll, be talking to folks outside of my little world and realize they don't even know what YA is, or, that I do get the sense still that there is a bit of a divide between YA writers and, serious writers or adult fiction writers. and that we're taken a little less seriously, or that because we're writing for young people that we have to dumb things down, which, as you know, is not true at all. And at the same time, like, I have to, take ownership of the fact that before I started writing YA, I hadn't actually read a lot of YA. I read a ton while I was getting ready to write Kings. But I hadn't really discovered it myself until much later in my life. I wish I had. And to be fair, like, YA as we know it now didn't exist until more recently in the world of books. But yeah, I guess, it hadn't really occurred to me because nobody had really shared with me how awesome YA is. It was always pushing the classics, the canon, whatever that is. And so that's all I kind of knew. But yeah, it is hard, and it takes a lot of work to write something that will appeal to young minds and also take them seriously and treat them with respect, and also deal with the hard things that they're dealing with. They're dealing with really hard things, and so to manage those things in a way that feels real and thoughtful and fair to the characters in the book it's not an easy balance, I would say.
No, it is not. You have to be a really good storyteller to write YA because you have to keep them interested. And you have to make sure they like the character. If they don't like the character, they're gonna trash you on Goodreads, right?
Yeah, and they do, the little rotters.
So in your opinion, what direction is YA moving towards?
Yeah, I was thinking about that
Mhm.
question. I mean, who knows? Everything's moving so quickly, but um, I was thinking about all the rubbish that's happening now about around book bans and whether that's going to scare people. But I really don't think, I can't see YA writers being scared of that. I feel like
Mhm.
they're just going to get more fired up and write even more and try to tackle those issues that are being you know attempting to be downplayed even more. So I can just see, like, I like the trend that we're seeing in terms of just way more like intricacies of identity being portrayed, not just that one Black kid, but like the Black kid who's also queer and a drag queen, or who might be asexual, or like there's just so many layers of identities now that we're starting to see a little bit more variety and I guess like appeal or reach more readers and their intricate identities. I think that's just going to continue to escalate, and maybe that's just naive of me to and hopeful of me, but in terms of some of the editors and publishers that I've been able to connect with or engage with, um, the ones that I've been able to touch base with, and I know this isn't true for across the board, but there are definitely people doing some good work around trying to open up the avenues to publishing for more people, so that you don't have to go through the same avenues that we would have had to have gone before. That like, for instance, like I just did the Banff writers program, mentorship program, and that was specifically for YA writers, which you don't see very often. And then most of the folks in the group were marginalized identities, and here was an opportunity for them to work with published authors, to meet editors, to create those connections. And so there's another like avenue, another opening to more stories being told. So I hope that becomes more of the norm and not so much of a rarity. Yeah.
Mhm. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful too.
Yeah,
I
I think
think
we have to be hopeful in this case.
yeah,
We have to.
because I
Yeah.
think readers like older and newer who read YA, they're hungry for more of these stories, right? They're willing to they're more open to risk taking. It's just the publishers and the gatekeepers that they're really afraid.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
so I'm hoping, like, as we see more stories, and as like kids become more powerful too, and what they like, expressing what they want, and like demanding more,
Mhm.
people will smarten up, listen.
For sure. Yeah. So this is the question that students ask me all the time, and they always wonder, how dark and scary and explicit are you allowed to go when you're writing YA? When you put gore and violence in a book, is writing a graphic sex scene okay?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, this is the annoying answer, but I really think it does depend, because I have read some YA books. Like the one I always think about is Raziel Reed's uh sometimes it, or when it feels like you're in the movies, is that what's called? I can't remember. Um
Mhm.
that book, I mean, it came out a while ago. When everything feels like the movies,
Right.
there is some explicit sex in that book, and it is touted as YA, I believe, but it was also like a Canada Reads finalist, and a Governor General Award winner, and I think that was Arsenal Pulp. So like it depends on, some publishers I think will definitely go for that. And then some are a little bit more traditional and might, shy away from it. I will also say, like, I just worked with a younger writer who included some pretty explicit sex scenes in their novel, their YA novel, but they're so beautifully done and so thoughtful and really well informed too, in terms of like being with the times, in terms of what, in terms of consent, and in terms of different types of sex, not just the same old that we're told is sex. And so I could really see that being accepted and even encouraged, because it's thoughtful, because it fits the narrative. It's not just thrown in there as gratuitous or anything like that. In terms of violence, I'm actually not sure. I haven't read a lot of YA that has a lot of graphic violence in it. But again, I would say it would probably just depend on who you're trying to get your book to. I think some publishers are going to be open to that more than others, and so you'd probably need to do a little bit of research, to find out who will fit your book best.
Mhm. And that's, I think, important to talk about, beta readers, right? Having, a group of readers give you feedback,
Yeah.
and also thinking about revision for the book. Who um, will you compromise for revision? I know, like Arsenal Pulp, for example, they're willing to go different places, whereas a more mainstream publisher, like we are both published by Simon and Schuster, they're more conventional in how they sometimes approach the teen
Exactly. And
experience. Yeah.
some editors will be more
Hmm.
conventional. Some will be all for it, it really, and there are younger editors coming up and that kind of thing. So, I mean, things might shift a bit, depending on, just generationally, and people moving with the times. But yeah, I think it's really hard to say, like, this is okay, this is not okay, because it will really depend.
Hmm. Publishing is always changing. The
Yeah.
people are always moving.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I know. Like this is our conversation right now is gonna be dated like in 2 days.
It's true. By the time they finish writing the report, it's like completely irrelevant.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry. There's some other questions from students. Someone wants to know, how do you go about avoiding tropes when writing queer characters, especially in the YA genre?
Mm. That's a tricky one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, couple of things. I mean, I start with characters, so I really delve into my characters a lot generally before I start writing the plot or the story. And so I'm trying to get to know them as well as I can. And not all writers do that. Some writers like to discover that more as they're writing. And I do that too. That's inevitable, I think, but I spend pages and pages and pages just exploring character and writing in their voice and sort of letting them um, tell me about themselves. And so for me, I feel like that has really helped me shape characters who are just like human and real, for me at least, and on the page. And so, and help to avoid falling into like stereotypes and tropes.
Mhm.
And not to say that I haven't fallen into those. I think, like with Kings, for example, now I look back on it and, I'm 6 years out, and I think, Winnow, for example, does fall into a bit of a trope of like the manic pixie, to some extent. And, I probably could have done some more work around her character and fleshing her out a bit more, so she had sort of a life of her own. So I have learned to, even with some tertiary characters, to do a bit more of that character work, to find out more of that character's inner life, so that they are more rounded, that they are fuller, because that's sort of what you're aiming for, I hope. But I mean, do you like actively avoid tropes? Are you really aware of that when you write?
Actually, no, I kind of just write whatever comes to me. And I think, where people help me identify that is with, my my readers or the editor, the agent. I
Because it's
think
hard to get out of it sometimes. Like you feel like you're writing this full character, and then other people, like I didn't really realize that about Winnow until I heard somebody who I really
Mhm.
respect kind of mention it. And so, like it's so important, right, to get feedback early, and obviously well into the process. Not too much feedback, but enough that it's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see your own work, I think. And then it's also hard to worry about other things when you're so much in the process of writing because it's so isolating in many ways, right?
Yeah.
When
And
we're,
you kind of want
especially
it
in
to
the early, hmm,
right?
sorry.
Kind of want to separate out those voices early on. And you
Yeah.
really do want to just write your story, I think. You kind of have to get it out. If you're thinking too much about all the criticism you could get, then I think that's really stifling. So um while I think about character earnestly, I think the like tropes, the finding the problems with your characters, I think that is something that comes a little bit later on in the process. Otherwise you might not ever get your story out, I would think.
Mhm. Final draft, that's where it comes later, right?
Mm.
It's, yeah, the first few drafts, don't even think about the audience, don't even think about the criticism.
It's hard not
It's
to,
hard
but
not to, yeah.
I think it's important to try and separate it out.
Yeah. That's a really good point though. So this question goes more to the more glamorous side of writing. So what has your interactions with fans been like? Or rather, how would you approach interacting with fans? I feel like we all have very different experiences with readers, depending on what genre we write.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I
hopefully all your readers are nice.
Yeah, no, they're not. But I I feel like you have had trickier situations. I think memoir is hard. I'm like people I feel like just break down boundaries there that they shouldn't. But I've had definitely way more good interactions with readers than bad. Learned very early on from my editor and my agent not to read good reads. I did early on, like you're excited as a new author and you're like, oh my God, people are writing about me on the internet. And then you realize really quickly that that's not usually a good thing in general, and you should stay away from it as far as possible. So I definitely don't go to Goodreads to read that stuff, because it's also like most of it's not helpful. Like the critical or the criticisms are not helpful for me as a writer or for my psyche or in securities. And so that's where like some of the negative stuff happens, and I just try to ignore that and push it aside. But like the stuff that keeps me going is obviously when readers write to me and tell me that that they saw themselves, or they that they just really connected with the book, or it made them feel comfort or at home or that kind of thing. Like when younger readers especially do that, it's like that's all I need. It's really all I need. And then like I have some I don't teach my books because I feel weird about that, but
I don't either.
there are no, it feels so weird, like this captive audience. And then I mean, if somebody does that here, then I know what happens, and you might feel more comfortable doing that, but
Mhm.
I do not. And so it's I have people at school though who have put it on their reading list or whatever, other teachers, And so I've got like little, grade 8s, 9s, 10s, reading the book over the summer, and then they'll write a little book report on it or whatever. And that's super cute. That's so nice to see, and kind of fun to see what they make of the book, and if they like write some creative kind of fan fiction situation. That's always just kind of heartwarming and lovely. But yeah, I would say overall, it's been really good. That, knock on wood, I'm sure I'll have to deal with something terrible at some point, because I think a lot of marginalized writers especially do. But so far, so good.
Good. I'm glad. Yes. And definitely do not read Goodreads.
No,
It's one thing you learned today.
No.
Yeah.
Not worth the good reviews to read the bad ones. It's not.
No. Or when they send you reviews, you're just like, I don't want to look.
No.
Yeah.
No, or yeah, you're asking about, when people, that has happened to me. I don't know if that's happened to you, but like people will tag you on their posts or whatever on Instagram, even if it's a bad, like if it's I've had a couple where it's just really bad reviews, and it's just some, whatever, some reader somewhere read the book, hated it or whatever, and decided to tag as they ranted about how much they hated it. So weird. Like, maybe they're just trying to hurt my feelings. Maybe that's really just it. I don't know.
They want you to respond. I don't know.
I mean, it's tempting sometimes, but there's no getting into that. I think that's a bad idea.
Yeah, for sure. We have some time. Do you want to do a lightning round?
Oh gosh, I'm really bad at these, but sure, let's try it.
Okay, you can skip. All right. So number 1, writing a YA book is like fill in the blank.
Writing a YA book is like pastry. It's really
Making
good.
pastry, it works.
And I usually eat a lot of it when I'm writing.
Okay. Eating pastry.
I told you I was bad at those.
Okay. I was gonna say, like, it's like stabbing out my eyeballs, but
eating pastry is much better. You should
there
try
you go.
it.
Yeah, I should.
That sounds terrible.
Okay. The second one. Okay, I'm gonna eat more pastry. Being tagged in a negative review of your book is like fill in the blank.
Yeah, that honestly is just like, it's like somebody coming up to you and telling you that they hate you to your face. That's how it feels. That's what it's like. Like, we're people. Just because you write it down, it's any less harmful. Yeah. Violence. It's like violence.
It's like violence. It's true. They just forget we're writers behind, the book cover. Yeah.
I do think they get that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this one. Would you rather have to read your Goodreads reviews every day and have a serious writer's constipation for 2 years, or be forced to go skydiving?
I hate heights, but I would definitely choose skydiving.
Okay, we're going skydiving next time in Vancouver. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we're doing that.
I didn't say there were consequences to these questions.
I'm holding you to your word.
Okay, you saw it all here, people.
Okay. Favorite writing snack or drink?
All the things. I love writing at cafes. And so like a really nice coffee, usually I'm a tea drinker, but when I go out, it's usually for coffee. And I have a favorite cafe here in my neighborhood that they make, just like I said, amazing pastries. And so I will often have a nice coffee and a pastry of some sort as I write.
Oh, that's nice. I'm going to try that one day.
So lovely. It's much better than stabbing your eyes out.
Okay. And lastly, because we are almost out of time, what is one piece of advice you would give to all these aspiring YA writers in the audience?
So I'm going to go with what I also tell my students so much that they're probably sick of hearing it from me, which is like, you really have to embrace the mess. Like the mess of writing is messy. And like I said, it's not efficient. And people have ideas, people have great ideas, but it takes something to actually like write through those moments of perfection. And I think we're all sort of stuck in wanting to write things really well the first time, or we're, you know, when we're scared to write things and get them down that aren't good or aren't don't sound good, don't look good. And so, I mean, that's my experience in terms of my own, like what stops me from getting words out, is just that, you know, I can write anytime, but it's having to really embrace that's a lot of what I write is going to be garbage. I really do think that is writer's block. You know, it's just fear of writing garbage. And so you have to write through that. Like you have to be willing to like free write and brainstorm and, you know, set a timer and just write whatever comes. That I saw another question about like, how do you get through moments where you kind of feel stuck? Or you do kind of feel like you have writer's block, and that is it. Like I will just pause, set a timer, and just start writing because it's better, right? Like it's at least I have something, I've got something out, instead of staring at the screen. And then just like the second part of that would be like actually finishing a novel, and getting a novel out into the world, however you end up doing that. But just like finishing a novel, first of all, is amazing. It's like that alone is an amazing accomplishment, but it takes like a supreme amount of diligence to do it. Like it's not magical. It's not a magical process. You know, it's not glamorous. It is not. It takes like really hard work, and you have to just sit your butt down and you have to get the words out. There's no other way to do it. There's no magic trick to it.
You're right.
That's what I got for you.
Yeah. Because the people who don't finish don't end up with books. That's what I tell everyone. It's really hard to finish a book. It's very easy to begin.
Yes, like people have ideas, like amazing ideas, but those are only going to get you so far. Like it really does take a certain amount of consistency and hard work to just get it out.
You have to really want it.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Well,
hopefully you enjoy it too.
Yeah, enjoy the process, right? Eat a pastry.
Yeah, eat a pastry, light a candle, you know, make it nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for reading and joining us for the Q&A. It was wonderful to hear from you, all your amazing insights. And I think everyone here really benefited from it. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I hope you got something out of it as well. And thank you, Lindsay, for the organizing. Thank you to the Writers Union, and to University of Winnipeg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Jenny.
Good to see you.
Take care.
Great. I can't wait for your new book. Go wrap it.
Sure. I can't wait till somebody picks it up.
Soon, very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you agented?
I have an agent. Yeah.
It'll get picked up.
Yeah, sometime. Yeah. Your background's so cute. I know that's your real background.
School.
Amazing. That's your office at school?
Yeah, you can see Lindsay's plant in the corner. Wait, this is Lindsay's plant. I realized you look like garbage. Oh wait, turn the recording off.
You look great.
Did you turn off the recording?
Plants. I see the
recording. Stop recording.
Oh, okay. I should stop recording. How do I stop recording? Oh, stop.